They said no one deserved what happened to her. But that's a lie. Because when the mob came for Princess de Lamballe, they didn't come for her, they came for everything she represented. The blood that soaked Paris that September wasn't random. It was ritual. It was vengeance disguised as justice. And what they did to her body was not execution, it was message. Imagine the streets of Paris in 1792. The air thick with rot, smoke, and hysteria. The revolution had devoured its own morality, and what replaced it was something ancient, something older than politics. Crowds gathered not as citizens, but as worshippers in a new religion of violence. And that day, their offering was a woman. Her name was Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy-Carignan. To history, the Princess de Lamballe. But to the mob, she was a symbol of the old world, a friend of the hated queen, Marie Antoinette. They didn't want her death. They wanted her desecration. You see, revolutions don't just kill people. They perform transformations. They destroy the sacred to create new gods. The princess was dragged before a tribunal, her face pale, her eyes defiant. She was offered one chance to curse her queen and renounce the monarchy. Her answer was simple: I will not betray my sovereign. And that's when Paris turned into hell. Her refusal wasn't political. It was psychological warfare, the kind that exposes what humans become when order dies. They tore her apart, piece by piece, until the crowd became less human and more beast. Witnesses said her screams echoed through the prison walls like something unholy. But the horror didn't end with her death, no. That was only the beginning of what they had planned. Because what the mob did next was designed to break the soul of Marie Antoinette herself. It was an execution orchestrated not just for the people, but for the mind. And this is where the hidden story begins. The part that most historians will never tell you. The part erased from textbooks, because it shows what humanity becomes when the mask slips. You think you know the revolution? You don't. You've only seen the surface. Tonight, we descend beneath it, into the forbidden depths where politics ends, and dark ritual begins. Are you ready to see what they tried to hide? When they dragged her lifeless body from the prison gates, the city shifted, as if something sacred had been torn out of the world. But what came next was not madness, it was choreography. The kind of brutality too organized to be impulsive. Witnesses described it as a celebration disguised as slaughter. The mob paraded her severed head through the streets on a pike, her golden hair matted with blood, her eyes half open, still hauntingly human. They didn't just march, they performed. Women sang. Drums beat. And in that grotesque procession, the people of Paris became something else. They became instruments of a force they could not name. Because revolutions, my friend, are never born from chaos alone. They are guided. The mob thought they were free, but freedom had become the leash. When her head reached the doors of Marie Antoinette's prison, the guards hesitated. They say one of them, trembling, carried it to the queen's window. She looked once, and fainted. That single moment wasn't for vengeance. It was psychological theater. Someone wanted her to see what loyalty cost. Someone wanted to fracture her from the inside out. And here lies the deeper truth: the Princess de Lamballe was not killed because she was powerful. She was killed because she was pure. Because purity terrifies the corrupted. When a system wants to cleanse itself through blood, it doesn't destroy evil, it destroys the innocent who reflect what evil truly is. Every revolution has its ritual sacrifice, a chosen victim whose suffering resets the collective conscience. It's ancient magic disguised as politics. The same pattern repeats through every empire that collapses: Babylon, Rome, France, and yes, even now, in our own time. The only thing that changes is the costume. Look closer. The mob who paraded her remains believed they were punishing tyranny, but they were serving a darker command: the psychological need to annihilate what reminds them of their own moral decay. That's the hidden law of every violent age: destroy what you secretly envy. And in that blood-soaked revelation lies the first forbidden truth, the one most men never face, that civilization doesn't fall when its rulers become corrupt. It falls when its people learn to enjoy the spectacle. What happened after that day was more than horror, it was hypnosis. Paris entered a trance. The city pulsed with a strange new rhythm, one that fed on fear and spectacle. The people were no longer citizens, they were participants in a ritual they didn't understand. Blood had become currency, and cruelty, communion. The execution of Princess de Lamballe wasn't just an act of vengeance. It was the psychological reprogramming of an entire society. Think about it, how does a crowd of ordinary men and women transform into executioners overnight? How does the human heart unlearn empathy? The answer is older than the guillotine itself. You control the mind not through logic, but through emotion. And nothing rewires emotion faster than terror disguised as righteousness. The revolutionaries had discovered something the ancient empires already knew, that when you show the masses something so horrific, so unspeakable, they'll accept anything to never feel that powerless again. Fear becomes obedience. Horror becomes control. The princess's death was not only a punishment. It was programming. The display of her mutilated body sent a message deeper than words: this is what happens when you love loyalty more than the system. It was designed to erase the very concept of devotion. Because devotion is dangerous. It makes people ungovernable. The real revolution wasn't fought in the streets, it was fought in the human psyche. The mob was the weapon. The spectators were the battlefield. And the architects, the true architects, hid behind the illusion of chaos, watching the people destroy themselves and calling it justice. Even today, the pattern survives. You see it in how outrage spreads, how mobs form online, how hysteria becomes a tool of power. Every age has its guillotine, it just changes form. The algorithm now feeds what the blade once delivered. And here's where you must choose what kind of man you are. Will you remain asleep, believing history was just accident and rage? Or will you awaken to the fact that every public horror hides a private design? If you're ready to go deeper, to step beyond fear and into awareness, comment this phrase below twice: I see through the ritual. Do it now. Because the next truth is darker. And once you hear it, you'll never see power the same way again. What if I told you the revolution didn't begin in the streets, but in the salons? In candlelit rooms where men in silk coats whispered of freedom while drinking from golden cups. The same men who toasted liberty, financed death. The same pens that wrote of equality, signed execution orders behind closed doors. Because the truth is, revolutions are not born, they are manufactured. The Princess de Lamballe was not just a casualty. She was a symbolic target. Her blood was the price of a new social order, an initiation ritual for a reborn France. The mob believed they were dismantling tyranny, but they were pawns in a psychological experiment, one designed to prove how easily morality collapses under engineered chaos. Behind the noise of the mob stood invisible architects, financiers, philosophers, manipulators, men who understood that terror is the fastest way to reshape the human mind. The Enlightenment spoke of reason, but reason was only the mask. The real agenda was power, pure, cold, structural power. Every institution that falls must first be made to rot from within. First, you corrupt faith. Then, you distort justice. And when both crumble, people beg for order, any order. That's when control slides in wearing the face of salvation. It happened in Paris. It's happened in every empire since. And it's happening again right now, only the guillotines are digital, and the mobs scroll instead of scream. The princess didn't die because she was noble. She died because she represented memory. The kind of loyalty and grace that no new regime could tolerate. Her body became a warning carved into time itself, a message that still whispers, forget who you were, or die for remembering. That's why her head was displayed like an idol, the face of devotion turned into a trophy. The revolutionaries thought they had won. But in truth, they'd just proven that humanity can be made to worship its own destruction. And this, my friend, is the forbidden core of history. Power doesn't just rule bodies, it owns perception. Once they control what you see, what you fear, and what you celebrate, they don't need chains anymore. The mind becomes its own prison. The question is, who built yours? After her death, Paris fell eerily silent, as if the city itself was ashamed. But silence after horror is not peace. It's possession. Something dark had taken hold. The blood of Princess de Lamballe didn't just stain the cobblestones, it seeped into the collective soul of a nation. The revolution had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And every man who had watched, cheered, or stayed silent, felt it. The moment when you look into the abyss, and realize the abyss is looking back. Marie Antoinette was forced to live with that memory, the image of her friend's head, the face she loved, desecrated and paraded as a warning. But it wasn't meant only for her. It was meant for every heart still capable of love or loyalty. It said, this is what happens when you care. It was the weaponization of despair. That's how control systems evolve. They don't just threaten your life, they poison your meaning. They teach you to distrust your own goodness. They turn courage into suicide and obedience into virtue. And the most effective prison is the one you build inside your own mind, thinking it keeps you safe. Look around you. The same machinery hums beneath every age. When you are bombarded with fear, outrage, humiliation, and spectacle, it's not chaos. It's calibration. They measure how much horror you can consume before you go numb. And when you go numb, you're finally manageable. The revolution didn't end in the 18th century. It just changed languages. The guillotine became the narrative. The mob became media. And the execution square became the global stage, where people are paraded, humiliated, and destroyed in public to remind the rest of us, fall in line. But there's one thing they can't program: awareness. Once a man starts to see the invisible architecture around him, he becomes unpredictable. Dangerous. Free. The story of Princess de Lamballe isn't about death. It's about awakening, the kind that begins with horror but ends with clarity. She stood loyal in a world collapsing into madness. And that loyalty cost her everything. But it also revealed the truth that every powerful man must eventually face: you cannot serve two masters, the system, or your soul. After the revolution ended, France tried to bury what it had done, to silence the memory of the Princess de Lamballe. But some truths refuse burial. They resurface like ghosts, whispering through time, haunting the descendants of both killers and kings. Because history is not just written, it's programmed. And when an atrocity is too dark to erase, it becomes ritualized instead. Hidden in art, in architecture, in the symbols of power that still surround us today. Look closely at any great civilization, you'll find monuments to cruelty disguised as triumph. Every empire builds its beauty atop bones. The revolution was no different. It promised liberty, but its foundations were laid in psychological terror. The spectacle of death wasn't accidental, it was intentional conditioning. It taught people to fear being seen, to fear standing apart, to fear thinking differently. That's how all control works. Not through force, but through permission. You learn to censor yourself. You become your own enforcer. That's the brilliance of the system that was born in 1792 and never truly died. The guillotine simply went inward. The princess's mutilation wasn't meant to horrify, it was meant to educate. To show the masses what happens when someone remains human in an inhuman world. They called her loyalty treason. They called her grace corruption. They called her compassion weakness. Do you see the inversion? That's how moral realities are rewritten, by twisting virtue until it becomes a crime. And here is the forbidden truth that still governs you now: institutions don't survive by feeding on power. They survive by feeding on guilt. They make you believe that obedience is morality, that silence is wisdom, that doubt is sin. Once they convince you of that, they don't need to execute your body, they can execute your will. That's why this story matters. Because every man who hears it stands at the same crossroad she once faced: betray your truth, or die to yourself to keep it. That choice has no era. It's eternal. So hear me now, this isn't about France. It's about you. It's about what happens when the world demands you surrender the parts of yourself that still remember honor, loyalty, and light. And if you've come this far, you already know, awakening always begins with blood. There's a moment, always, when a man finally understands that history was never about kings and revolutions. It was about control. Not over land. Not over wealth. But over consciousness. What they did to Princess de Lamballe was the oldest ritual of power: destroy the symbol of purity, then convince the world it was justice. That's how every empire rewrites the story of good and evil. That's how every tyranny is born. They made her death a mirror, and humanity stared into it, and forgot its reflection. That's the real horror. Not what they did to her body, but what they did to the collective soul. They trained the world to look away from truth when it bleeds. To confuse beauty with vanity, loyalty with weakness, compassion with guilt. And every time you accept that lie, you keep the ritual alive. You see, men today are no different than those who filled the streets of Paris. They too are told who to hate, who to fear, what to cheer, what to cancel. Only now, the execution square is a screen. The guillotine is a comment section. The mob doesn't shout, it scrolls. And every time you join in, you feed the same ancient machine that devoured her. But there's another path, a forbidden one. To step out of the ritual. To see the manipulation not as history, but as design. When you see through it, when you refuse to offer your mind to the mob, something happens: you become sovereign again. That's the power they fear most, the awakened man who remembers his own mind. The Princess de Lamballe could have lived. All she had to do was lie. Betray her friend. Renounce her truth. But she didn't. She looked into the face of death and stayed loyal to what was real. That's not weakness. That's mastery, the kind no revolution can destroy. So let this story change you. Let it burn the illusions you were taught to worship. Because once a man sees how fear is manufactured, how obedience is sold as virtue, he never kneels again. If you've reached this far, you've crossed the threshold. You are no longer an observer of history, you are its survivor. Comment once more: I see through the ritual. And remember, the moment you awaken, the system loses control. Forever.